Thank you, everyone, for sticking around for the last talk of the day. I won't keep you long, I promise that much. So I'm excited to talk to you about our project eBird. My name's Tom Auer. I'm at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I want to give a little bit of background as the first half of my talk. Maybe not half, but give you some context, help you understand what we're doing. It is kind of a different use case. We're in mostly an academic use case. And then talk about our experiences with Spark and how it's worked for us. So at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, we have a mission to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And I'm a bird person, and if you're a bird person, you know why birds, but a lot of people maybe don't appreciate why birds. Why are birds a good reason to study the Earth? They're beautiful, unique, individual creatures. But they also have some other characteristics that make them worth studying. They are living dinosaurs. They are the direct descendants of dinosaurs and the biggest group we have left over of dinosaurs. They're pretty incredible creatures in that regard. There's over 10,000 species. There's a significant amount of diversity represented within birds, and while it's not as much as insects or plants, there's a lot of diversity to study there. There's a lot of unique characteristics that birds have. They are found in all environments, both polar regions, open oceans, deserts, you name it. There are birds that like those kinds of environments and habitats, and that makes them valuable species to study in terms of studying the Earth. But they're also adaptable. They're found in unique environments, novel environments, human-adapted environments, and so that adaptation ability makes them a particularly interesting group to study as well. And they are sensitive environmental indicators. They respond to changes in the Earth, things that we have done. For example, the Indian vulture once covered India and Pakistan up to 30 million birds in 1990. Today, they're almost functionally extinct due to an anti-inflammatory drug used in cattle that the vultures would eat and die as a result of eating. And so we have a sensitive response mechanism to study. But really for us, the reason that birds are worth studying in this way is that they're really easily observed, counted, and studied, and especially true for most animal organisms. Sure that whales or bears or other characteristic megafauna are really popular, but birds are widespread, and there's a culture behind observing birds, right? It's been called bird watching, now it's called birding, but this culture is something that allows us to study it in an interesting way and gives us information. And we do that through a citizen science project at Cornell called eBird. And this is a project that encourages people to go out and submit observations about birds when they go birding. We have a diverse set of people who participate. We have a mobile app. We have a website with lots of features. But basically what we do is we ask that when you go out birding, you open up your mobile app and you start a checklist. And you tell us what you saw, right? A list of birds that you've seen, and how many of them did you see? We also ask that you give us some contextual information, some metadata. How long were you out? How many people were you with? Where did you go? What time was it? And we can use that information to paint a picture about birds. We have a significant global footprint, and it has represented now 30 million collective hours of observation, which is incredibly significant and growing all the time. So we're really able to paint a big picture of where birds are across the world. But what do we do with that data is what's really important. How do we use that? And so we argue that the conservation of a species begins with an understanding of the distribution, the abundance, and then the movements of those birds across large geographic areas, high resolutions, and over long periods of time. This is the information that we really need. And so you can imagine that citizen science data is kind of messy, right? It's not uniform, there's bias involved with it. And so what I'm showing you here is an animation of that information that we need. This is an abundance model. The really bright orange and white areas are showing you the high abundances for this bird species, magnolia warbler, for each week of the year at a very fine spatial resolution, about 3 kilometers. And this is from a model that we've built using eBird data and predicted this bird estimation of abundance. And so then when we have that information, we can use it in different projects. So for example, We have a partnership with the Nature Conservancy here in California to do a dynamic land conservation project in the Central Valley called bird returns. There are over 50 species of waterfowl that historically migrate through the Central Valley, but only 5% of the native wetlands are remaining. And so the Nature Conservancy saw an opportunity to create habitat, pop-up restaurants for birds, basically, where they keep fields flooded earlier in the spring and later in the fall by asking rice farmers to keep that water there. And they do this through a reverse auction method, where they look for the lowest bid from the farmers to keep this water on the land. And then they prioritize where they're going to accept those bids based on the abundances that we've provided, the estimated abundances. We can also push this out into dynamic interactive web tools. This is one we're just putting out right now, eBird.org/birdviz. We're putting those estimated abundances into a tool that can be used by conservation practitioners, land managers, and anybody who's interested in studying these bird distributions. You can extract information about abundance or habitat association. So we have a direct output for our model results. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how we got to this information and how Spark has helped. So the main goal is to transform this messy citizen science data into something uniform and usable. Here you're seeing locations in green dots of where the species, the magnolia warbler, was seen for 1 week. And there's really tiny gray dots. There's too many of them to map at the same scale, but there's tiny gray dots everywhere the bird wasn't seen. And so we want to use machine learning to fill in the gaps. We want a uniform spatial surface. And we also want to control for bias, because the way that people go look for birds isn't the same from person to person and isn't the same in different environments. And so we can use machine learning to help deal with that bias and to fill in the gaps and create this uniform picture of bird abundance. And as I said, we do this through the machine learning, but the goal really of that is to understand a relationship between the bird populations and the environment on the ground. What habitats are where the birds are. So we put in a bunch of NASA data. We've got elevation, we've got land cover configuration, and then that search effort that I talked about with the checklists. How long were you out? Who were you with? And that allows us to understand the confounding factors as well. But there are some challenges when we do this, and this sets up kind of the scale of the problem. When we scale this across large spatial areas, we have an issue because birds use different habitats in different parts of their ranges. So here I've put up a picture and a distribution model result for tree swallow. On the west coast, you might find tree swallows in large agricultural fields, indicated by that small yellow box. On the east coast, in the North Carolina area, tree swallows prefer open fields, grassy fields near woodlands. And so if we were to take all of that data, the millions of data points that we have, and fit one giant model, we would get terrible statistical performance because of this issue. And so the goal and the idea is to fit lots of small independent models that allow us to get really high quality statistical results and then solve this ecological challenge. However, fitting a lot of independent models presents a computational challenge. So we developed a modeling workflow that we call the spatiotemporal exploratory model. This has been in publication for a number of years now. But the idea is to divide up the landscape into partitions. So we take all of space and time and divide it up into regions. And then we train and predict models within those regions. So you can think of dividing up North America into 1,000 kilometer by 1,000 kilometer squares, 40 days deep, and then replicating that 100 times. So we have 100 randomized replicates so that we can develop an ensemble and get really high statistical quality. We then need to bring those results back together. So we've predicted within each region to a uniform grid of locations, that high resolution that I talked about earlier. We want to average those predictions across all the models for each location within those regions. So from a data level, what does this look like? What does this workflow translate into? So we're going to start by taking the training, testing, and prediction data for an individual species and randomizing it into those partitions. Right now, for each species, we have about 12 million rows of data and 2 gigabytes that go in. But that gets expanded significantly because the prediction data gets expanded by time, and then we expand to 100 randomized partitions. So that blows up to almost a terabyte of data per species. And now we're going to fit and predict each one of those regions. And we have up to 20,000 regions that we might end up fitting in the end if they have enough data within them to fit and predict. So that leaves us with a little bit less data because we're predicting less fields than we had predictors coming in, and we don't fit every single region. So we're down to about 1 billion rows or 100 gigabytes of data. And then we do that drill down. We summarize across the 100 replicates to build the ensemble of the models. Gives us about 52 million rows and 12 gigabytes of data per species for a result, and that gets written out to a gzip file. So how have we operationalized this so far? Well, it's a lot of R, and the R part of this comes really from our community, our research community. The ornithological research community that does species distribution modeling is based in R. All of those ecological modeling methods are being developed in R. And we always want to be kind of pushing the envelope. Our research goals are centered around dealing with the biases associated with the messy citizen science data. And so we're always going to have a really strong R focus to our development. And I want to just jump in and talk exactly about what the modeling we're doing is, because there's been a lot of talk about the machine learning methods that people use in these kind of workflows. So our current modeling starts with a sampling to address class imbalance. So we have spatial bias because people go birding near the cities where they live. They don't go birding in really remote areas all the time. And there are other sorts of class imbalance associated with rare observations. So we do a sampling to deal with that imbalance. And then our first stage of modeling is a binary response gradient boosted machine. And this gives us an occurrence value. It says, what is the probability that a bird will occur at this location? That gets calibrated with a generalized additive model and then goes into a second stage of modeling where we have a Poisson response gradient boosted machine, and that gives us the abundance value. How many birds do we expect to be there? And then all of these models use weights. So we have a fairly complicated modeling workflow, machine learning workflow here that is firmly rooted in R. And like I said, we want to be pulling in things that are being developed in ecology. There's a type of modeling known as occupancy modeling, which is a hierarchical regression modeling that deals with the effects of detection and bias. And so that's something that we're going to want to use again in the future. I'm pretty sure that Spark MLlib is not going to offer occupancy models in the near future. We also want to pull in semi-parametric learning, such as GAMBoost LSS, or hybrid learning models that have statistical methods in them, such as the surfing package. So we're going to be in R for a while. So what have we tried to make this workflow run? Well, we started with HPC parallelization a long time ago. We have access to clusters on campus at Cornell, and it's great to have that resource, but it took a long time to run a single species, about 3 weeks. And this was both due to the fact that we couldn't get a very large cluster there, but also due to the inefficiency of that parallelization. My predecessor ported us into Hadoop MapReduce, and that was a good start. But it was very quickly apparent that Spark was the new hot thing that was much faster, and so I started the work to port from MapReduce into Spark. And the first idea was, to go into Spark R, because we're in an R community, and it would be great to continue using R. However, we couldn't match the performance we got with MapReduce with Spark R. It just wasn't there. And so we moved into the base Spark API. And the way that we made that work is by using the RDD pipe function. So we're able to take our data into RDDs, do some data munging, and then export basically the pieces of the model that we want to do the fitting and predicting out to an R process. This came somewhat from the Hadoop streaming model. It has a similar structure, but is a lot easier to program and code. And this allows us functionally to keep our R libraries in our community, in our development environment, and still get performance for the workflow as a whole. However, the R pipe, I would say, is pretty clunky to code, and to read in and out through standard in and out, it's a little bit difficult to set that up, and it may have some performance issues. So I can translate basically that workflow with the steps that I talked about before into a fairly small amount of PySpark code. It's only about 30 lines, and it would be less if I didn't have to do all the data munging associated with coming in and out of the pipe. But we start with input text, basically our big blob of training, testing, and prediction data. We pass that through an R function that assigns the region information. It makes the replicates. And then we do that chunk of text munging to get it down to a group by key. So basically every line of eBird data that's going in gets assigned to one of these regions and grouped by key, a unique region. So then we pass it on to the part where we want to fit and predict within each region. This is pretty straightforward. We've grouped by key, so each key is one of those regions that we want to fit and predict. That goes into another pipe where we fit and predict out the results. We repartition down for efficiency. And then we do another group by key. So again, we were going to average across regions for that fine set of prediction locations within each region. So we'll group by those, that fine scale location, and then average that information together by passing it through one more averaging function in R. And then finally save that as a text file out to a gzip. So Spark has been great for this. It's 25% faster than MapReduce, which is fantastic, pretty quick performance. It's very portable, which is fantastic. We've developed with Spark standalone on our local HPCs and then moved it to Microsoft Azure, which we just finished a grant with. And it's been very scalable. Over the past 2 years, our data volume has doubled, and we've been able to deploy without really having to make any changes to our code. We just have been able to add some more nodes to our clusters. So what's next? Well, I'm reevaluating the RDD pipe. I've seen a lot of talks talking about other ways to do this. I've seen mention about user-defined functions, and then I saw today that Sparklier now has user-defined functions, or just about to have user-defined functions, so that's an appealing alternative for R. Spark data frames certainly might be faster, but it does seem that if we're using the pipe, we might not get a performance gain out of the Spark data frames. We are using more Spark in a lot of places, including pre-processing and post-processing. And so just to wrap up quickly, just want to highlight that the RDD pipe function allows us to keep our code base within R, within our community language, use new modeling libraries that aren't going to be available readily in Spark MLlib. But we can still use the Spark API to parallelize our modeling workflow to address these challenges. And so I think it's great that we can still use the framework as a whole. I've seen this echoed across a couple talks. People want to do kind of unique customized things with the machine learning methods, but it is still possible to use Spark to really speed that up, especially if you want to run 20 or 30,000 models, which is what we need to do. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. So again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to one of these standing microphones and ask away.
So do you have plan to provide a public API to some of the model prediction? Because I know eBird has a pretty awesome API. So
To provide public APIs to the model results?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know if we're going to provide an API, but we will provide the results probably in some sort of flat format. We have a pretty distilled set of things that we want to share publicly. So that will be out later this summer or fall. We just processed about 200 species on Microsoft Azure, so we have a good suite of North American species to share.
I was curious, I don't know if that was just an abstract representation in the slides, but the regions that you create, I don't know if they're actually squares, but I was curious how you settled on the regions, what spatial unit you were using.
Oh, how we chose the extent of the region?
Yeah.
So a lot of that was designed by some of our statisticians a while ago, but it was basically, you wanted to have not too small. If you have too small of a region, you don't get enough regional context for the species. You get kind of a hyper-localized prediction. And if you have too large of a region, you're predicting really different habitats. So we did some experiments. What we'd really love to implement is a quad tree, where we could have an adaptive region that was tightened down to a certain location. But we've actually had a really hard time finding a performant implementation of quad trees that runs 30,000 times. So. Great.
Well, if there are no more questions, then let's give Tom one more round of applause.
Thank you.